We will give everyone a moment to get logged in and settled.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. Today, we're going to be talking about launching your career as a principal investigator. I'll use the term PI often throughout the webinar. But I do want to mention that this webinar is being recorded. We're going to go over a lot of information, so unfortunately, we won't have time for Q&A today. But like I said, it's being recorded and it will be uploaded into your career portion of your program. So feel free to take notes. As we go in the upcoming months, we will be having a webinar each month, going over various topics, diving more into your career development and things of that nature. So I do want to say thank you all for joining me today. I will shut off my camera as I go through the webinar just because of connectivity issues and the weather where I am. I just want to make sure that we get through this hour. Um, so we'll jump in. My name is Jessica Angelescu, Internship and Partnership Procurement Manager. All right. So we're going to be talking about your career development, and this being kind of your success guide um, as you go through your career path. You're looking to apply for jobs, things of that nature. All right, so let's start off with what a principal investigator or a PI actually is. So when we kind of look at the top two things, we're looking at legal accountability and regulatory reality. So with legal accountability, the PI is the individual legally and ethically responsible for the conduct of a clinical trial at a site. This responsibility is not symbolic. It carries regulatory weight and personal liability. When we move over to the regulatory reality, so when regulators inspect a site, they do not audit the CRC. They audit the PI's oversight. This is why PI approval is conservative and risk-based. So as you are all going out and looking at either continuing to apply for roles or you're getting close to your program completion and you want to start thinking about applying, there are core responsibilities of the PI. Um, and it's important to understand these so that as you create your resume, your LinkedIn, you're looking at potential jobs, you know what the expectations are, you know what your responsibilities will be. So overall, a PI is accountable for every aspect of trial conduct, regardless of delegation. So the PI owns the following. So subject safety. So ultimate responsibility for participant well-being, adverse event assessment, and safety monitoring throughout the trial lifecycle. Then we have data integrity. So maintaining accurate, complete, and verifiable source documentation that can withstand regulatory scrutiny and sponsor audits. Moving on, we're looking at regulatory compliance. So meeting all FDA, ICH GCP, and institutional requirements for documentation, reporting, and ethical conduct throughout the study. Up next, we have protocol compliance, and this is ensuring every procedure, inclusion, exclusion criterion, and visit schedule adheres to the approved protocol without deviation. Up next, we have staff oversight. So supervising delegated team members, ensuring competency, training, and appropriate task assignment based on qualifications. And then lastly, we have the sponsor trust. So building and maintaining credibility through consistent performance, responsiveness, and demonstrated commitment to quality standards. It's critical that you understand that delegation does not transfer accountability. The PI remains responsible for all staff actions, protocol deviations, and data quality issues. This legal framework is why sponsor, medical directors, and CRO oversight teams apply rigorous selection criteria when approving investigators. All right, so let's look at how PI selection really works. So sponsors and CROs do not select PIs based on seniority, academic titles, or clinical reputation alone. The selection process is systematic, risk-based, and driven by objective performance indicators that predict future trial success. So the fundamental question that drives hiring managers and that they will ask themselves during the interview process and that will ultimately be determined if you're hired or not is, will this investigator protect subjects and data without constant sponsor intervention? This question reflects the economic and regulatory reality that problematic PIs consume disproportionate monitoring the resources, increase deviation rates, delay database locks, and create regulatory exposure for sponsors. So when we're looking at the key assessment criteria of a hiring manager, we have these kind of 6 highlighters. So we have prior trial performance. So enrollment velocity, protocol deviation rates, data query response times, and completion percentages from previous studies. Sponsors maintain internal databases tracking these metrics across all investigators. Next up, delegation discipline. So appropriate task assignment, current training documentation, clear delegation logs, and evidence of staff competency verification. Weak delegation practices predict future regulatory findings. They're also looking at responsiveness. So reply times to sponsor queries, monitoring visit availability, safety report turnaround, and communication quality. Slow investigators delay timelines and increase costs. Up next, we have compliance history. So the FDA inspection outcomes, Form 483 observations, warning letters, clinical investigator disqualifications, and institutional review board sanctions. Even minor compliance issues create long-term reputation damage. Next to last, we have oversight behavior. So documentation of regular safety reviews, protocol deviation assessments, source documentation verification, and intervention when issues arise. Passive PIs create unacceptable risk. And then staff stability here at the last one. So coordinator turnover rates, institutional infrastructure, team experience levels, high turnover signals, management problems, and predicts enrollment challenges. So when we're looking at a sponsor perspective, so as the medical director, we track every PI across our portfolio. Investigators who require excessive monitoring, generate repeat deviations, or respond slowly to safety signals are quietly removed from future study consideration. This information is shared internally and sometimes across industry networks. PI approval is conservative because the downside risk, patient harm, data loss, regulatory action far outweigh any potential enrollment benefit from selecting an unproven investigator. So this can have a serious impact on your career. Sponsors maintain multi-year performance records. A single problematic study can eliminate PI consideration for 3 to 5 years across multiple pharmaceutical companies. Conversely, consistently strong performance creates preferential site selection and early protocol access. So let's talk about who can become a PI. What are the eligibility requirements? So clinical research regulations establish specific professional qualifications for PIs. However, possessing the required credentials represents only the baseline threshold. True PI readiness requires substantially more than licensure and clinical experience. So when we're looking at what else in your background? We have these four kind of topics. So physicians, so an MD or a DO. So medical doctors or doctors of osteopathic medicine represent the majority of clinical trial PIs. Active, unrestricted licensure in the trial jurisdiction is mandatory. When we look at dentist, a DDS or a DMD, dental professionals may serve as PI for trials involving oral health, dental devices, periodontal therapeutics, or maxillofacial procedures. Up next, we have advanced practice providers. So NPs, PAs may qualify as PIs depending on the state, scope of practice laws, institutional policy, and sponsor requirements. And then we have psychologists and PhDs. So licensed psychologists and doctor level researchers may serve as PIs for behavioral health studies, cognitive assessments, and non-interventional research. So when we look beyond, the license, professional credits alone do not ensure PI approval. Sponsors evaluate holistic readiness across multiple competency domains. So let's dive into those essential competencies. So up first, we have availability. So sufficient protected time for protocol review, safety assessment, monitoring visits, and team oversight. So it's typically 4 to 8 hours per week minimum. Up next, we have leadership. So the ability to direct research staff, manage conflicts, enforce compliance standards, and maintain team accountability. Then we move on to documentation discipline. So this has to be consistent, thorough record keeping that meets regulatory standards without requiring CRA prompting. Next, we have regulatory respect. So understanding that GCP guidelines and protocol requirements are non-negotiable, not admin suggestions. And then lastly, team oversight ability. So the capacity to assess staff competency, identify training gaps, and intervene when performance issues arise. So let's move over and understand why training programs exist. So structured PI training programs have emerged because clinical excellence alone does not translate into research oversight competence. The skills are fundamentally different, and here's why. So clinical care focuses on individual patient optimization. Research oversight requires systematic protocol adherence. Clinical decisions permit judgment and flexibility. Research conduct demands strict standardization. Clinical liability is individual and immediate, and research accountability is regulatory and long-term. So as a first-time, PI, here's a little piece of reality. So sponsors consider clinicians without prior sub-investigator experience or formal PI training to be high-risk candidates. Every highly accomplished physicians with decades of clinical experience face initial PI approval challenges if they lack documented research involvement. The pathway to PI status requires structured progression through sub-1 roles, mentorship, and demonstrate regulatory competency. All right, so let's look at the legal and regulatory role of the PI. So formal regulatory obligations. So the legal responsibilities are codified in federal regulations. So 21 CFR 312.60. You have the ICH GCP guidelines and Form FDA 1572. These obligations create binding commitments that carry regulatory enforcement consequences, including clinical investigator disqualification, warning letters, and potential criminal liability in cases of fraud or willful misconduct. So when we're looking at the core regulatory responsibilities, you have the Form 1572. You have protocol adherence insurance, staff supervision and delegation, informed consent integrity, adverse event and SAE reporting, and regulatory documentation maintenance, as well as inspector and monitor cooperation. So when we look at the delegation versus accountability, you want to look at one critical regulatory principle. So delegation does not remove responsibility. Regulators hold the PI accountable for all staff errors, protocol deviations, and documentation deficiencies, regardless of who performed the specific task. This principle creates tension for busy clinician investigators who must balance clinical responsibilities while with research oversight. The PI cannot claim ignorance of staff mistakes or protocol violations. So during the FDA inspections, common observations include the investigator failed to adequately supervise delegated study activities. The investigator did not review source documents or case report forms in a timely manner. The investigator was unaware of protocol deviations occurring at the site, and the investigator delegated tasks to unqualified or inadequately trained staff. So, regulatory enforcement realities. So, between 2018 and 2023, the FDA issued clinical investigator qualifications to PIs who delegated excessively without oversight, failed to review safety data personally, or were unavailable during critical study periods. These disqualifications prohibit the individual from serving as a PI for years and are publicly disclosed in FDA databases, effectively ending research careers. The legal accountability framework is unforgiving. PIs must, excuse me, actively supervise, not merely delegate and assume compliance. All right, so let's understand when to supervise versus when to perform. So effective PIs understand that their role is fundamentally about oversight and accountability, not task execution. So attempting to personally perform every study actively creates bottlenecks, reduces efficiency, and actually increases error rates by preventing appropriate staff utilization. The PI's value lies in strategic supervision, quality assurance, and intervention capability. So as a PI, you must do these things. So you want to delegate appropriately. So assign tasks to qualified staff based on training, experience, and regulatory requirements. You want to ensure training and competency. So verify that each staff member has current GCP training, protocol-specific training, and documented competency for their delegated tasks. Up next, review data and safety regularity. So conduct systematic reviews of the case report forms, source documents, adverse events, and protocol deviations on a defined schedule. This is typically weekly. Intervene when issues arise. So you want to be sure you're taking immediate corrective action when deviations occur, data quality degrades, or staff performance issues emerge. Also, always be sure to document all interventions. And then lastly, we have document oversight actions. So this is maintaining records, proving active supervision like review logs, query resolution sign-offs, safety assessments, and all monitoring visit participations. All right, so we know what you should do and must do, but let's talk about what you should not do. So You will not be performing routine data entry or transcription. You will not be handling all subject phone calls and scheduling. You will not be personally filing every regulatory document. You will not be attending every monitoring visit for routine review. You will not micromanage experienced coordinators with proven competency. And then lastly, you will not be signing documents without reviewing the content. So as a PI, you need to recognize and understand when to step in. So strong PIs develop judgment about when active involvement is required versus when staff autonomy should be maintained. So let's look at a couple scenarios that always demand PI engagement directly. So safety signals, any serious adverse event, unexpected adverse reaction or pattern of similar AEs requires immediate PI assessment. Casualty determination and reporting decisions cannot be delegated. All right, protocol deviations. So when deviations occur, especially those affecting subject safety or data integrity, the PI must personally assess severity, implement corrective actions, and approve the deviation report. Up next, we have regulatory documents. So with the Form 1572, protocol amendments, consent form changes, and other regulatory submission require PI signature and therefore PI review. Signature without reading is grounds for investigator disqualification. All right, so let's look at the last one here. So monitoring audits. So you must be available during monitoring visits to discuss findings during sponsor or FDA audits to answer questions about study conduct and oversight practices. So if we're looking from a sponsor medical director perspective, this is likely what would be they would be saying. So we can immediately identify PIs who delegate without oversight. The patterns are obvious. They can't answer basic questions without their study. They're unaware of recent deviations. They haven't reviewed the last 3 serious adverse events. These investigators are quietly removed from future trial consideration. Conversely, PIs who delegate appropriately while maintaining active supervision are trusted with complex studies and receive preferential site selection. So the expertise-based delegation model. So effective PIs develop trust-based relationships with experienced coordinators, delegating broadly while maintaining verification checkpoints. So an example of this is a strong PI might delegate all routine study visits to a certified CRC while requiring weekly case review meetings. This preserves the PI's time for clinical practice while ensuring robust oversight. The key is systematic verification, not micromanagement. All right, so as you're going out into the world and you're wondering, what does a sponsor look for in a new PI? So let's talk about what that looks like. So they do have an evaluation framework. So when pharmaceutical companies and CROs assess first-time PI candidates, they apply rigorous risk assessment frameworks that prioritize predictive indicators of future performance. The evaluation is systematic, data-driven, and deliberately conservative because the cost of selecting a problematic PI excuse me, in terms of delayed timelines, compromised data quality, and regulatory exposure far exceeds any enrollment benefit. All right, so let's look into this framework a little bit more. So prior sub-investigator experience. So sponsors strongly prefer candidates who have served as sub is on multiple trials, ideally in the same therapeutic area. They're looking for individuals with demonstrated comprehension of the ICH GCP guidelines, FDA regulations, informed consent requirements, and data integrity standards. They're also looking for availability for safety review. So this is concrete evidence of protected research time, typically that 4 to 8 hours we talked about weekly being the minimum for protocol activities. Responsiveness to queries. So track record of rapid, complete responses to monitoring queries, safety questions, and sponsor communications. Willingness to follow protocol scrutiny. So evidence that the candidate respects protocol requirements as binding commitments rather than flexible guidelines. And then lastly, quality of site staff. So assessment of coordinator experience, institutional infrastructure, regulatory file quality, and team stability. So let's move on to looking at the high-risk PI profiles. So sponsors maintain internal databases identifying PI characteristics that predict problematic performance. First-time PIs exhibiting these patterns that we're going to talk about face systematic rejection. So they're looking at no prior research involvement, excessive clinical commitments, weak coordinator support, and unrealistic enrollment promises. So again, let's go back to the CRO site selection director. So they're saying, when we receive a PI application from someone with no documented research experience, the default answer is no, regardless of credentials. We need evidence of systematic thinking, regulatory respect, and team management capability. The easiest way to demonstrate these qualities is thorough, progressive sub-investigator involvement. First-time PIs with this foundation are considered too risky for sponsor investment unless they complete structured PI training programs and partner with experienced research sites. So if we're looking at the PI approval timeline reality, so first-time PI candidates should expect 12 to 24 months between initial interest and the first PI approval. This timeline includes sub-investigator service, formal training completion, site infrastructure development, and relationship building with sponsor personnel. Attempting to shortcut this process through aggressive networking or enrollment promises typically backfires, creating negative reputations that persist for years across sponsor databases. Okay, so let's look at some of the most common reasons PIs are rejected or removed. So there's a total of 7. So lack of availability. So the pattern that they've noticed is consistently unavailable for monitoring visits, delayed in safety report review, unresponsive to urgent sponsor communications, or absent during critical study periods. The next one we have up here is the delegation logs outdated or incomplete. Staff performing tasks beyond documented training. The PI is unavailable to explain who is responsible for specific protocol activities and evidence of signing without review practices. All right, up next, we have serious adverse events not reviewed by PI within 24 hours. Casualty assessments are delayed beyond regulatory timeframes. SAE reports submitted without PI assessment documented. Number 4 is repeated protocol deviations in the same categories, particularly inclusion, exclusion violations, visit window failures, or procedure omissions. Next up, we have the consent obtained by non-authorized staff, procedures performed before consent signature, subjects unable to recall key trial information, and consent forms not using the most IRB approved version. Number 6 is data queries unanswered for weeks, monitoring visit follow-up items not completed, CRA emails ignored, and repeated request needed for basic documentation. And then number 7 here is missing training records, outdated CVs, incomplete delegation logs, absent IRB consequent correspondence, and gaps in protocol version control. So let's look at the database reality. So what is the industry truth? Every PI removal is documented and shared internally among sponsors. Pharmaceutical companies maintain investigator performance databases that track deviations, inspection findings, removal reasons, and monitor feedback across all trials. This information persists indefinitely and influences site selection decisions across therapeutic areas in study phases. So, I know that we've mentioned that a couple of times, but what gets recorded, you might ask? So the reason for removal or rejection, protocol deviation summaries, monitoring visit findings, response time metrics, audit or inspection outcomes, subject enrollment versus projections, and coordinator turnover patterns. So then let's look at the career impact timeline. So within the first 6 months, internal sponsor flags prevent new study assignments. 6 to 12 months, information is shared with CRO partners and alliance teams. Between 12 and 24 months, reputation effects spread across industry networks. 2 to 5 years, removal creates presumption against approval at other companies. And then 5+ years may require site restart or institutional change to reset your reputation. So if we're looking at the rehab pathway, PIs who have been removed can potentially rebuild credibility, but it does require 2 to 3 years of flawless performance as a sub-investigator at a different institution, completion of advanced GCP training, documentation of corrective actions addressing the removal cause, and typically partnering with an established site that can vouch for reformed practices. This pathway is difficult and success is not guaranteed. Prevention through initial excellence is far preferable to attempting the rehabilitation. So let's talk about how to become a PI. So there is a progression model. So the PI status is not a role that can be assumed through credentials alone. It represents a curriculum of structured progression that demonstrates increasing responsibility, regulatory competency, and proven oversight capability. So sponsors and CROs evaluate candidates based on documented performance at each stage, making the pathway systematic and merit-based. Okay, so we have these kind of 4 steps. So you have sub-investigator, which is the entry-level research role focused on protocol execution, subject assessment, and support of PI oversight. We have the lead sub-investigator. So a lead senior sub 1 with expanded responsibilities, including protocol development, input, and junior mentoring. When we look at PI on the low risk study, so the first PI role typically on phase 5 device or low complexity therapeutic trials with close sponsor oversight. A PI on complex trials, this is with approval for phase 2, 3 studies, complex protocols, and multiple concurrent trials. So when we're looking at the steps to PI approval, so you want to be able to demonstrate reliability as a sub-investigator. So this means serving on a minimum of 3 to 5 trials across 18 to 36 months. You want to participate actively in monitoring visits. So be present for site initiation visits, routine monitoring, and closeout activities. Review safety data consistently. So you want to establish a pattern of systematic adverse event review, thoughtful casualty assessment, and proactively safety monitoring. You want to complete your formal PI training. So obtaining certification from recognized programs such as ACRP, SACRA, or institutional PI development courses. With these courses, it should and must cover GCP regulations, Form 1572 obligations, delegation principles, safety reporting, and inspection readiness. And then build a stable research team. So you want to develop relationships with experienced coordinators, ensure adequate backup coverage, establish site infrastructure, including regulatory systems, and demonstrate team management capability. So training and certification programs. So while not always mandatory, formal PI training significantly accelerates approval timelines and demonstrates commitment to research quality. So again, key programs includes the ACRP certification, the SACRA training, and institutional programs. So when we're looking at it from a senior investigative perspective, here's what we've heard. I mentioned as a sub one, I mentored as a sub one for 4 years before my first PI role. That progression was essential. It taught me how monitoring works, what deviations actually look like in practice, and how to manage coordinator relationships. When I finally became a PI, I already understood 80% of the oversight requirements because I'd watched my mentors handle them. The investigators who struggle are usually the ones who try to jump directly from clinical practice to PI roles without serving their sub one apprenticeship. So let's talk about timeline expectations. So realistic progression from initial sub one role to first PI approval typically requires 2 to 4 years. This includes year one, which is the basic sub one experience, and year two, the lead sub one with expanded duties. Year three is PI training completion and team building. Year four is first PI approval on low risk study. Attempting to accelerate this timeline through aggressive networking, again, usually backfires. Sponsors trust demonstrated competency over self-promotion. Okay, so let's talk about PR responsibilities during study startup. So this represents the foundation period where PI engagement or lack thereof establishes long-term performance patterns. Sponsors closely observe PI involvement during this phase because early behavior predicts future oversight quality. Low engagement during the startup correlates strongly with downstream protocol deviations, delayed enrollment, and monitoring challenges. So during week 1 and 2, the PI must conduct thorough protocol review, assessing inclusion, exclusion criteria against available patient populations, evaluating procedural feasibility, given clinic workflows, and identify potential resource constraints. Delegation of authority is week 2 and 3. So this is where the PI develops comprehensive delegation logs specifying which staff members are authorized for which protocol activities. Staff training verification is in week 3 and 4. And this is where the PI ensures all delegated staff complete GCP training, protocol-specific training, and procedure-specific competency assessment. Going on to week 3 and 4, you have the review IRB approved informed consent documents, ensuring understanding of all elements of informed consent and approve specific staff members authorized to conduct consent discussions. Then we have the IRB submissions oversight, which is week 4 to 6. So this is where the PI reviews all IRB submission materials, including protocol, consent forms, recruitment materials, and regulatory documents. Lastly, the site initiation participation, weeks 6 and 8. This is the attendance at the site initiation visits, and it's typically required by sponsors. So when we're looking at high engagement indicators versus low engagement red flags. So PIs who demonstrate strong startup engagement exhibits these behaviors. So they ask detailed protocol questions. They suggest minor protocol modifications to improve. They personally attend site initiation visits. They review delegation log line by line. They identify potential recruitment challenges and mitigation strategies, request clarification on ambiguous protocol procedures, and establish regular safety review schedules before enrollment begins. So when we're looking at the low engagement or the red flags or where sponsors become concerned, um, that's the provide enrollment projections without reviewing patient databases, absent from site initiation visit or arrive late or leave early, unable to answer basic protocol questions during SIV, delegation log prepared entirely by the coordinator without the PI review, consent processes not discussed or reviewed by the PI, IRB submissions signed without evidence of PI review, and training records incomplete or outdated for key personnel. So from an individual CRA field observation, so during site initiation visits, I can predict which sites will have problems based on PI management. When the PI asks thoughtful questions, challenges feasibility timelines respectfully, and reviews delegation carefully, I know the site will perform well. When the PI shows up 30 minutes late, says, "My coordinator handles that," and signs documents without reading them, I immediately flag the site as high risk. Unfortunately, these predictors are accurate about 90% of the time. So when we're looking at the startup investment principle, effective PIs invest 10 to 15 hours during startup phase conducting thorough protocol review, training staff, and establishing oversight systems. This upfront time investment reduces downstream problems dramatically. Sites with strong startup processes typically experience 60 to 70% fewer protocol deviations and 40 to 50% faster query resolution times throughout the study. The ROI on startup engagement is substantial and measurable. All right, so let's look at active oversight throughout the trial lifecycle. So study conduct represents the longest and most demanding phase of PI responsibility. Unlike startup activities that are time limited, conduct phase oversight requires sustained attention, systematic review processes, and continuous vigilance over weeks, months, or years. PIs who can maintain rigorous oversight throughout this phase build sponsor trust and receive preferential consideration for future trials. Oh my goodness. All right, so regular safety reviews, eligibility oversight, AE and SAE assessment, query resolution oversight, staff supervision, protocol deviation review, and monitoring interaction. So during study conduct, effective PIs maintain a sophisticated balance between staff delegation and personal oversight. So let's kind of look at the framework that helps maintain this balance. So you have the daily PI activities, which is review SAE notifications, monitor coordinator communication for urgent issues, and stay available for same-day safety questions. Time commitment for this is about 15 to 30 minutes a day. When we look at the weekly activities, review all new AEs and ongoing AE assessments, check enrollment status versus projections, review any new protocol deviations, sign completed case report forms, and address coordinator questions or concerns. And this is about 2 to 3 hours a week. All right, so let's move on to the monthly. So comprehensive regulatory file audit, staff performance review and feedback, review monitoring, visit reports, assess overall study timeline and metrics, and update sponsor on enrollment trajectory about 3 to 4 hours a month. So when we look at from a regulatory inspector observation, during FDA inspections, I ask PIs to describe their most recent SAE. Strong PIs can immediately recall the event, explain their casualty reasoning, and describe any action taken. Weak PIs say, I'd have to check with my coordinators or provide vague answers suggesting they haven't personally reviewed the case. The single question often determines inspection tone. PIs who demonstrate active oversight receive minimal scrutiny, while those who delegate blindly face extensive investigation. All right, so the PI role during monitoring and audits. So monitoring visits and regulatory inspections represent the moments when PI oversight is directly evaluated and documented. These interactions create permanent records that influence sponsor site selection decisions, regulatory inspection outcomes, and long-term investigator reputation. Preparation and professional engagement during monitoring audits separate high-performing PIs from those who face career limitations. So, what inspectors assess? So, during sponsor audits and FDA inspection, evaluators systematically assess PI oversight through specific inquiry methods. So they're looking at PI availability, the PI knowledge of protocol, the PI documentation oversight, the PI awareness of deviations. So here are some critical questions that PIs must be able to answer. I definitely encourage you, since we are coming up on time very quickly here, to come back, watch the recording, pause it during this section, and review each aspect and how to best structure answers. Definitely recommend that. So when we're looking at a resume or a CV template, you know, resumes require name, contact information like city, state, if you're applying to jobs on site. You have your phone number, you have your email, LinkedIn profiles, or portfolios. So you really want to focus and research-focused CV. So you don't want to present yourself from a clinical CV aspect. So clinical CVs emphasize patient care experience and procedural competencies. Research CVs prioritize protocol involvement, regulatory compliance, and team oversight, and sponsor interactions. So when we're looking at this structure, so you want to make sure you have your header section, which I mentioned, your name, your credentials, include license numbers, professional email, your phone number, and your profile URL. You want to have a professional summary. It's concise 3 to 4 sentence paragraph emphasizing research experience, regulatory knowledge, and oversight capabilities. When you're doing your clinical research experience, you want to use reverse chronological format. So for each role, you want to emphasize the scope, therapeutic areas, study phases, and specific oversight responsibilities. With certifications and training, you want to list all relevant research training with completion dates. You want to keep it current. And training that is older than 3 years suggests outdated knowledge. You can also include therapeutic area expertise. So list the areas where you have multiple study experiences. Be specific about study types and populations. And then clinical practice. You want to include clinical roles, but keep it concise. Sponsors care more about the research experience. Mention patient population relevant to research focus. So again, I do encourage you to come back in here, watch the recording, and read over the different areas that we've gone over. So a strategy note for your CV is quantify everything possible. Number of studies, subjects enrolled, deviation rates. You want to avoid unexplained gaps. If you took time off to research, you want to briefly explain why. Make sure you're updating your CV every 6 months with new studies, training, or accomplishments. And tailor therapeutic areas, emphasize to match specific study opportunities. You want to keep your CV to 3 to 4 pages maximum. Sponsors review hundreds of CVs and appreciate concision because they give each resume about 10 seconds to review. So you want to make sure that you are sticking to those key competencies, those keywords, skills, look at the job description, kind of mirror your relevant clinical experience. So you want to be concise. So PI cover letter template. So this is an example. Again, I encourage you to come back in, read through it. The cover letter is a little bit different for the PI versus, the other clinical roles. Here are some best practices, and then ensuring that you do not include these on your cover letter, and you want to make sure that you're using this targeting strategy when you are doing your company research, when you're applying, when you're creating your resume, when you're tailoring your resume against the job description. All right, so LinkedIn profile template. So LinkedIn serves as a primary digital presence for clinical investigators, sponsor medical directors, CRO site selection teams, and research organizations routinely search LinkedIn when evaluating PI candidates. So you want to make sure that you have a well-structured profile to increase your visibility, demonstrate your professionalism, and create networking opportunities. So if let's say CRO goes onto LinkedIn, types in the search bar, principal investigator, and then they hit enter, the first thing that's going to come up is your profile picture. You want to make sure this is a professional photo. The next thing that's going to pop up is your headline. This appears in search results and must immediately communicate research focus. You want to avoid vague titles and be specific about the role and expertise. So here are some examples to come back and kind of look at. So when we're looking at the About section, you want to use first-person narrative focusing on research experience, oversight philosophy, and collaboration interests. You want to structure in 3 to 4 short paragraphs for readability. You don't need to make this extremely long. Who are you? What is your approach? What is your expertise? What is your training look like? What are you interested in? What are your certifications? So basically a kind of very short to the point cover letter or resume. In your experience section, use reverse chronological format. Emphasize research roles over clinical positions and quantify your achievements where you can. Then licenses and certification section, you want to make sure that you have all of them listed. And then a skills section. So top 10 skills. LinkedIn does allow up to 50 skills, but you want to prioritize research specific skills. LinkedIn does allow endorsements. So instructors or individuals you've worked with previously can come in and say, yeah, this person has clinical research. You can also you can request recommendations from individuals that you've worked with or coworkers or colleagues, things of that nature in your profile. LinkedIn strategies. So connect with CRAs, CTMs, and medical monitors you've worked with. You can also join clinical research groups to increase your visibility. share occasional research-related content. You want to avoid oversharing and keep your focus on research. Make sure you're updating your profile immediately when completing a new study or getting a new certification. Again, here, request recommendations from a sponsor personnel or experienced PIs who can vouch for your work quality. All right, so here are some application-heavy strategies for PI approval and success. So we do have quite a lot in here. This is where you want to come back, watch the recording, spend a lot of time looking and reading. So I'll go back up and I'll hold the page for 5 seconds so that you can, when you come back, you can make sure that you can pause on the page. All right, up next. All right. Almost there. Okay, so one thing I do want to mention, I know we only have a few minutes left, but when you're implementing this strategy, don't attempt all 40 strategies simultaneously. Focus on the first set of strategies, then move on to the next, and the next, and the next. Systematic implementation over 2 to 3 years produces sustainable results superior to attempting to have rapid transformation. Okay, so the final thing, being a principal investigator or a PI is not a title. It is a regulatory obligation. So successful PIs consistently demonstrate availability, discipline, protocol respect, staff support, and subject protection. Training exists because the proliferation of PI training programs, GCP certifications, and investigator development courses reflects the essential truth. The principal investigator oversight cannot be improvised. Clinical excellence provides necessary foundation, but insufficient preparation, excuse me, for research conduct. So again, come back, pause, take notes, let it all sink in. I know we did a lot of information today, but thank you so much for everyone that was able to join. For those of you that couldn't stay, be sure to come back, watch the recording. It will be in the career portion of your course within the next couple of days. And again, I thank everybody for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, evening. Again, we'll have monthly webinars moving forward, so definitely be on the lookout for that. And I'll see you all next time.